the people that moved into Crystal, and they felt that they were getting a step ahead of the game.
If you understand the history of Crystal and the small town feel, hey, this is a place that it existed before, it can exist now.
Crystal is a great place, and it still is one of the best kept secrets, I think.
The city of Crystal, Minnesota is a vibrant suburban community that has a rich history which is well worth exploring. We begin our exploration well before there was a Crystal and even a state of Minnesota. On March 3, 1849, during his last hours in office, President James K. Polk signed a bill adding the Minnesota Territory to the United States landscape. It wasn't until the early 1850s that the first settlers, John Ware Dow and John C. Bohannon, staked claim in the area. Fast forward to 1858, and Minnesota became a state, and many townships were formed in this area, including the Township of Brooklyn, the Township of Minneapolis, and the Township of Plymouth.
In 1860 is when the Township of Crystal Lake was organized. So the original Township of Crystal Lake included Robbinsdale, as well as the Camden neighborhood of Minneapolis, the southernmost portion of Brooklyn Center, and of course Crystal and New Hope. The Crystal Lake Township was named after Crystal Lake.
That was the big lake, and they liked that lake, so they named the whole township after that lake, and they even named the Crystal Lake Cemetery after that name. And then Robbinsdale incorporated in 1887. So Crystal said, hey, we better do something, otherwise the city is going to be gone.
And it was at that point in which they decided to organize as the Village of Crystal.
The official village incorporation took place on January 11, 1887, with the first election of village officers happening a few months later. The original village population was about 587. While the move to become a village brought greater organization and identity, it also brought something that became a sore point for some in the area. Some believe that this sore point led to some trying times for the village.
Because the farmers didn't like being taxed for street lights and sewer services that they weren't taken advantage of because they're still farmers.
They were charged $1.50 a year for taxes for the lamplighter in Camden, because this was the urban sprawl.
Their incorporation lapsed. And at first I thought that was maybe a purposeful thing because, again, people don't like paying taxes. So after a few years paying taxes to the village of Crystal, they might have thought, oh, this isn't any better. So, but I actually don't think it was purposeful, because I found a newspaper clipping from February of that year trying to get a bill passed to allow villages to reincorporate without waiting the required 6 months. This reincorporation must have failed, because instead the village of Robbinsdale incorporated, taking up what was once the downtown area of the village of Crystal. Due to this, there was no hurry to reincorporate. That was in 1893. It wasn't until 1911 that there was pressure again to incorporate, to not be annexed into Minneapolis. At this time, both Brooklyn Center and Crystal incorporated. Crystal included what is today both Crystal and New Hope, but the same story played out. The farmers didn't like being taxed, so the less populated western side of the village broke off and formed the Township of New Hope in 1936. The boundaries were in flux as property developed, which went on until 1953.
So 100 years after what started as a very large area known as the Crystal Lake Township, the city of Crystal now had the shape and the boundaries that we see today. What we now know as Crystal officially became a city in 1960. Much of the north-central portion of the city of Crystal is occupied by one operation. That would be the Crystal Airport. Believe it or not, airplanes have long had a presence in this area, but why? And who were some of the famous individuals that rose to the skies out of this area?
It started as a delivering mail, and then they, after the war, they sold all of the Jenny airplanes that they used in World War I. And they sold them for $50 a piece. So a lot of people bought them, and there was a lot of barnstormers and everything like that. But they had a spot here, and they could deliver airmail. There was a couple of pilots here that flew out of here that were pretty well known. The first one was Charles Lindbergh. He wanted to get a plane, and he said, well, before you get a plane, I want you to get your license so that we know that you're valid, and all that stuff. So he says, I got a guy that I can introduce you to that he said he'd teach you. So that was Charles Holman. So Charles Holman was teaching Charles Lindbergh how to fly with this so he could take his test and pass. And they got to be pretty good buddies, and they were delivering mail all the time. And so pretty soon after he got his license, and then they were flying and stuff, and then they got together and formed Northwest Airlines.
The airport did end up changing its location and its name as time moved on. It was first called Robbinsdale Airport when it opened in 1920. It was located near the intersection of West Broadway and 49th Avenue North. And one of the true hotspots near the airport was the Ellis Log Cabin Cafe. It featured dining and dancing starting in the 1920s. Many a night was spent there with fine food and lively music. It stood on the site where Steve-O's is located today. As for the Crystal Airport, it opened in 1946 as a private airport. Then 2 years later, the Metropolitan Airports Commission purchased it, and it still runs today. Another location of fun and excitement in Crystal came, albeit briefly, in the 1950s with the advent of the Bearcat Speedway, where racing cars was the thing to do.
Bearcat Speedway started in 1950, and they were going to make a big deal out of it, and so they were running every Sunday. Naturally, there was a lot of dirt, and so the people were complaining when they were racing. There was a lot of dirt going around. It's right next door to us here, just about 100 feet or so, and they used it right in the corner there. It used to be after the Speedway was there, it was the Babe Ruth ball field. Then of course they moved it over here and they built houses in that area.
The transition to what would become a community with large pockets of many homes and close-knit neighborhoods was about to begin. Those homes not only overtook the location of the Speedway and the original airport, but they also were built on stretches of land, such as this along Douglas Drive, that were home to many farmers. Family-run farms such as the Becker Farm, which Becker Park is named after, and the Galkey Farm, which operated for decades along Douglas Drive south of 42nd Avenue, flourished for years on the rich soil which was called the Crystal Prairie. As the years passed by, the farms gave way to increasing demand for homes and modern developments.
We had a lot of development right after the World War II, a lot of development in the 50s, and then that started to taper off in the 60s and a little bit in the 70s, and you see that with the split levels and stuff like that. We have a lot of Ramblers and a lot of Cape Cods, which were very affordable, and you got a fair amount of square footage with not a very big footprint.
The people came home from World War II, and there was a few houses on certain areas where you could buy the house for $50 a month or something like that, and you had yourself an instant home.
It was really amazing to see the city growing up. I always tell my kids that I grew up at the best time because all these different changes and stuff, and that, you know, that came about the party line telephones, my granddaughter thinks her dad's a fireman now for Elk River, kind of followed the family footsteps, but he's got, fancy radio, and I told my granddaughter how it used to be, and she just couldn't believe that, She's 12 years old, but really, that's what they did?
As the 1950s came to a close, Crystal wasn't the only one growing in population. Other surrounding cities and townships were as well. That led to a tug-of-war between municipalities as to who owned what and exactly what city boundaries would end up looking like. And that tug-of-war process left the city with some very interesting boundaries, including this section of the city near 36th and Winnetka that includes apartments, businesses, and cemeteries that are completely surrounded by the city of New Hope.
New Hope and Crystal finally decided, let's make some boundaries and then turn into a city, because they were arguing for years where they were going to go. The story I understand was they were going to have Winnetka as the boundary. Okay, then they said, well, no, we don't want to lose that much, New Hope said. So their biggest thing was Bass Lake Road. And then they moved it inward, more east. And so Bass Lake Road, they said, well, New Hope said, we want all of the buildings and all of the land right along Bass Lake Road for tax purposes. So it went all the way to the Crystal Bank, which is now Wells Fargo. The picture of Crystal, it looks like a motorboat, or the motor on a motorboat.
Public Works employees in the different cities, they know what city they're in based off of the curb line. So the city of New Hope, they have a more inclined curb line to the streets, whereas the city of Crystal has a more traditional, or like the steeper curb line. I thought it was really interesting to learn that they actually purposefully did that so they could easily determine which city they were in.
You don't have to look too hard to see the city's jagged boundaries today. A perfect example is here along Bass Lake Road, where the street signs jump from the green of Crystal to the blue of New Hope. As the area filled with homes, there were many new families in need of shopping options, and the growth of what is now a robust retail base in the city was on. As the business community and neighborhoods took shape, many important decisions were made here at the Crystal City Council chambers. Overseeing those discussions for 8 different terms as mayor during a 30-year span was Pete Meinsma, who is remembered as a key figure in Crystal's stable local government. Mayor Meinsma, the council, and city staff saw the community modernize and blossom, as did the leaders and staff who served during the 1950s to the 1970s.
Well, there was a lot of vacant property, a lot of houses that were, they'd build 2-3 houses, it'd be 2-3 open lots. And so we watched houses get built, and we watched just the city kind of fill in all the little gaps of the city.
Streets were, kind of rugged, no curbing. Target came in to Crystal. That was a big thing. We felt like it was a real coup to have that, and we shopped there a lot.
It was, like I say, it was a first ring suburb, so it was, I think, the people that moved into Crystal and Plymouth, they felt that they were getting a step ahead of the game. Hey, we're in a little newer house and a little newer suburb, and I think it was just a advancement in their lives.
There was a Thriftway grocery store. That was about it for groceries. And across the street was Frenzel's Meat Market. And they had diagonal parking, and it was kind of an incline, as I recall. I always worried that I'd come out and find my car, you know, going down the street.
If you understand the history of Crystal and the small town feel that you have, that used to be there, it's easier to recreate that. It's easier to know that, hey, this is a place that it existed before, it can exist now. And really, there's no reason you can't reach out to your neighbors, you can't have kids playing together in the neighborhood, running around the neighborhood still. That still happens in Crystal. It does.
As for retail strongholds in the area, the Target store here on West Broadway continues to draw crowds. And a little known fact is that this store is known as T3, as it was planned to be the third Target store ever opened, but it actually was the second Target store opened, as the store at Knollwood in St. Louis Park was delayed. Another tidbit to know about this Target store is that the script for the movie Juno was written in the coffee shop right here. Speaking of movies, portions of the Keanu Reeves flick Filling Minnesota were actually filmed in Crystal at a motel that used to exist along County Road 81. That roadway, now called Bottineau Boulevard, has been a key transportation route for Crystal throughout the years, along with the well-traveled Highway 100. Both have seen significant changes over the years to serve Crystal and the neighboring communities.
Well, you know, Highway 100, and yeah, it was kind of your get somewhere quick, you know, way of traveling. Highway 169, which was County Road 18, was, you know, back in the day, cars weren't as dependable as they are now. So when you went, like, especially as a kid, that was kind of a travel to go out to Plymouth, because there wasn't much out there. It was pretty open and not a lot of building out there. So it was, to go on the other side of County Road 18 was quite the experience. It was like a day trip.
We've seen a lot of changes, especially Highway 100 and 81. It used to be that I could drive down the end of a street near me and just pull onto Highway 100 and go south and whatnot. And now it's a freeway and it's a lot safer. We used to have some pretty dangerous intersections at 36 and Highway 100 and some less dangerous in different locations, but those have been made safe. Highway 81 used to be a place where traffic always backed up, and now we're to the place where traffic flows very freely and we don't see any backups anymore. So that has been really great to access all the other freeway systems. So it doesn't matter where you live or where you work in the metro, you have quick access to the freeway system.
Some of those changes to the flow of traffic in and around the city spawned early stages of redevelopment, and redevelopment is still an often heard discussion topic here at City Council meetings decades later. One perfect example of an area that saw early redevelopment due to road changes was the intersection of Highway 100 and 36th Avenue North, which used to be the home to Melky Field and more. This is where high school sporting events drew huge crowds, and a large shopping complex and restaurants met the growing needs of the community. Another development in Crystal's history is when the city merged its fire department with its neighbor to the west, the City of New Hope. That came in 1998 and formed West Metro Fire. The Crystal Fire Department had a long and rich history and was a perfect example of how people throughout the years dedicated a huge part of their lives to the Crystal community. The merger process took some convincing and some foresight, but it brought firefighting here to a whole new level.
Being the changing times and all, with less people volunteering and wanting to do stuff, it was almost a inevitable thing that we had to do, was to combine it to keep the manpower, especially during the days. It was real hard to get day firefighters to be around, you know, and interrupt their sleep schedule so they go to work the next day.
I got to know a lot of people, residents, you know, we consider them as customers, friends, and our motto is neighbors serving neighbors, and that's what we do. You know, my neighbor's house catches on fire, I'm gonna be there. You know, the 2 miles away, I'm gonna be there. It's a great way to give back to the community, and you kind of get paid for it and things like that. But I don't think people get on for that reason. They get on because they want to make a difference.
Another way that the firefighters of Crystal gave back to their community was through the city's huge annual summer celebrations. What used to be known as the Vulcan Frolics and brought many a fan to sit in the bleachers to watch some top-notch softball is today known as the Crystal Frolics. The annual event has featured many activities over the years, some which have clearly stood the test of time.
A great public get-together, hometown reunion for everybody and their brother, from high school people to guys that played ball together. And the fire department had a great, they ran that Frolics for many, many years. And the Women's Auxiliary had a huge food tent there. And you always knew it was Frolics time because my mom, being on the auxiliary, she made the beans, baked beans, and boy, she could make baked beans. And people would come from all over to have her baked beans and, you know, hot dog and hamburger at the food tent. And then the fire department would go up there a couple days in advance and set up tents. We'd set up tents for a couple of the other organizations. And then, of course, our beer tent. And Old Home Week, I'm telling you, it was old firemen would come from Arizona or down from the Brainerd Lakes area where they'd retired to, and, you know, talk to you and visit. And kids I went through high school with would come up there, and great baseball games going on. And it was really a good time.
They always had beer, as I recall, and fireworks. Yeah. Before we had fireworks, we had to go to Robbinsdale for the fireworks. I can remember riding in several convertibles and waving like I was somebody.
While the Crystal Frolics brought people together in the community for a weekend of fun, there were other key hot spots in the city that still bring the community together throughout the year. A few great examples are the Crystal Pool, which was built in the late 1960s, and the Crystal Community Center, which came together in the late 1980s. Crystal has a proud history of attractive and engaging community parks that continue to offer something for all ages throughout the entire year. One recurring theme that spans much of the history of the city of Crystal and continues on today is neighborhoods. From the connections that are made through living on the same block to involvement in neighborhood schools and serving side by side in community groups and organizations, the city of Crystal is known as a place where people come together.
The neighborhoods that are here in Crystal are really Crystal's strength, and it's kind of what I grew up in. So it was being really close to the neighbors. You knew your neighbors, you got to know them very well. You would, spend evenings with them from time to time.
Crystal is a great place, and it still is one of the best kept secrets, I think. It's a wonderful community that, to me, it's just because the people are so, to me, the neighbors, the residents are so down to earth and so, I think, just committed to being decent people. I know that's trite, but it's just a great community, I think.
Here's another clear sign that neighborhoods are very important in Crystal, not just to those who live in the city, but to the city leaders and staff who strive to support strong resident-to-resident connections. This map, which hangs prominently at City Hall, shows a colorful breakdown of all of the neighborhoods in Crystal and the individual name of each close-knit area. These names are also on signs throughout the city, so residents are always reminded of the unique neighborhood that they can call their own. This can be seen as another sign of how the city has respected and embraced residents on a wide array of levels, including fiscal responsibility and growing diversity.
We don't have a whole lot of different funding mechanisms. Everything's on the tax rolls. Everybody can see it. Assessments, we don't do assessments for anything that can be planned. We actually plan for that and fund it. So there's really a financial dynamic here that is really respecting citizens and the money that they give to the city for their services.
If you walk up and down the strip, Bassick Road strip, and those small shopping centers, a majority of those, I believe, are owned and operated by people from other countries, which is really, really exciting, really cool. It's affordable space, they have great visibility, they provide great services, and it does make Crystal known. People do come to the Crystal for those restaurants or those services or whatever. So it's exciting. It's very exciting to know that we have a community that can support that.
We hope that you enjoyed this look at the history of Crystal, from its origins as a farming community on through its many shapes and sizes. We got to visit a few big names from the past and traveled on to what Crystal looks like today, a modern city with all the amenities, but also still enjoying that small town feel. There is no way that we could fit all of the historical moments and individuals into this one video, but we hope that our scratching the surface of this amazing city's history gives you a better understanding of its past and maybe an interest to learn more. If you would like to learn more about the history of Crystal or possibly get involved in a group that loves talking about its history, go to crystalmn.gov and search Crystal Historical Society. I'm Dave Kaiser, and this has been Our Town Story Crystal.
Crystal is a place where people live. They don't know a lot about big industries or anything like that, but they always have a tie. There's always somebody who's lived in Crystal, been from Crystal, has an aunt or a grandma or grandpa from Crystal. There's always a Crystal tie.
I like Crystal because we are so close to Minneapolis that we're close to the cultural center of the state and of the region.
And it's a place where you can be who you are. You don't have to be this, you don't have to be that. You just come, be part of the community, be part of the family. Come to Crystal. The water's warm.